welcome back into Off the Edge. I am your host, Jacob Harrison. We're getting set to speak with my good pal, Joey Blackwell of Bama Central. You can find him on the Twitter machine at Blackwell Sports, covering all things Crimson Tide sports. They got him out on the diamond. They've got him out in the booth in football as well, basketball, you name it. Joey's got it. Joey, what's going on, man?
Doing all right, Jacob. How about yourself?
I'm doing incredible. It's been a fun day. There was actually news on a Monday in the offseason.
Doesn't happen very often these days, but glad to see it.
No doubt. But jumping right off of that, the news of the day is Julio Jones being cold called for all intents and purposes by the Shannon Sharp of Undisputed. I keep saying undefeated. Undisputed, Fox Sports 1. And it was bizarre in every facet of the meaning, but nonetheless, Julio Jones does put to bed and confirms the worst kept secret in the National Football League this year, that he does in fact want out of Atlanta just as bad as their cap space does want him out as well. What do you make out of this entire situation with Julio Jones and the Falcons?
Well, first and foremost, I really hope that the cold call was staged. I've heard a lot of talk about how some people were curious as to if it was staged or not. I really hope it was, because Julio Jones is the type of guy that's kind of always stuck to himself and a pretty humble guy, and Lord knows you don't want to see him get taken aback and all that be put out there when he didn't want it out there. But regardless about that, about the decision itself, there's a lot of teams that could be in the running. The Patriots I've heard talked about a lot. Belichick and Shanahan, they tend to look at things similarly, and this, coach has a thing for 30-something superstars. You think about Randy Moss, back in the day coming to the Patriots. They've added some pass catchers in free agency, but Kendrick Bourne was kind of a one-year proposition, being under $5 million contract. Nelson Aguilar was kind of a one-year wonder for them. This offense needs to make a huge leap from where it was a year ago, and Julio Jones could definitely add to that. Another team that I could see him going to, which Twitter kind of set on fire. I think it was out yesterday or the day before, with Julio Jones and Derrick Henry working out together. But I think the Titans could be kind of to put it in this way, kind of a sleeper team. There's an obvious connection between the Falcons organization with Titans offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. He's now the head coach of the Falcons, and I think those players. The Titans lost a top tight end, and their number 2 receiver in the off season, and those players, left a large gap that Tennessee didn't want to pay. Well, now they can probably take Julio. It would need some reworking with their money situation there, but they could get him, and I think that they could also be a good fit for him as well.
Looking back, I mean, it's been 10 years since Julio Jones caught his last pass at Alabama. Left an incredible legacy here, broke all sorts of records, and became one of the first, top 10 picks in the Nick Saban era as well. But just looking back on that time, you and I, are about the same age, and that was a time where we were learning a lot about football and about Alabama football as well. But we were seeing a blossoming of a new era in Tuscaloosa as well, and he was kind of the guy that started it all. How do you remember Julio Jones and the Crimson?
I remember Julio Jones as, obviously he was one of the, if not the first, big wide receiver prospects in the Nick Saban era. And obviously his size was, when you see him, when you first saw him on the field, his size was one of the first things that impressed me about him, as it did for a lot of people. He wasn't the best wide receiver in college. He wasn't a Henry Ruggs or an Amari Cooper at the college level or Devontae Smith, but it didn't matter, because when he finally got to the league, it translated over very, very well. And that's, what we've seen over the past decade. I think, Julio is, getting up there in age, but he still has a lot of, gas in the tank. He's still got a lot of good seasons of football. Now, unfortunately, injuries have kind of hurt him over the past few years. But even that, he still, leads the Falcons franchise in multiple records. And I think he's still got a lot left in him. But going back to, his play, I remember watching him play on the TV screen back before I was a sports writer and thinking to myself, this guy's going to make waves in the NFL, and that's exactly what he did.
No doubt. I mean, 10 years, he's the all-time leading receiver in catches and yards. I'm pretty sure in touchdowns, and it just feels rude to say because all the touchdown stigma that surrounds Julio Jones all those years in Atlanta. But moving on to current times in Crimson Tide sports. I know you're in Birmingham for the tournament and on the old diamond. Catch us up on what's been going on in Alabama baseball.
Well, the story for Alabama baseball right now was it came out that their first-string first baseman, Drew Williamson, will be out of the tournament, along with the guy they were using as backup, Davis Heller. Unfortunately, Drew Williamson will be missing from the lineup. He has a broken hamate bone in his wrist. He's still got a cast. He won't be playing this week. Along with that, Heller has a really bad, according to Bohannon, it was a pretty bad torn hamstring, and he'll be out. So they're going to be really weak on the left side. They're having to move. I know the first base is on the right side, but they're having to move their typical third baseman in Zane Denton over to first base. And on top of that, the shift has caused Evelyn to move to short and Jarvis over to third base. So they're going to be weak on the interior compared to how they normally are. Drew Williamson's bat was also very impressive this year for Alabama. He's third on the team and runs the season with 32. He also leads the team in doubles. I think he had 12 doubles this season so far, and he's contributed 21 RBIs over the course of the season. So his bat will be missed, but it really creates some defensive problems on the Alabama infield. Bohannon also announced today that Tyler Ross will be the starter in the diamond on the mound tomorrow for Alabama. Ross, of course, had to take over kind of that Friday starter job since Connor Prelip went down with an injury, and Prelip was only able to start 3 games this year, even though he was a preseason first-team All-American. He hasn't been able to contribute much this year due to that injury. And combine that with Antoine John, who had a really solid freshman year last year before the season was unfortunately cut short. He hasn't been able to play in over a month because of an undisclosed injury to him as well. Just a lot going on with injuries for this Alabama team. They're having to face a pretty solid South Carolina team. When the first name you think of when you think of South Carolina baseball is, their designated hitter, utility, Wes Clark, who made the All-SEC second team. He has 21 home runs, which is tied for second in all of NCAA baseball right now at the Division I level. So they're going to have their hands full. It's going to be if Alabama can win one tomorrow. Of course, they'll move on to a double elimination style play because the first 4 games are all single elimination. But if they can move on, they'll have 2 games, and those will make it minimum to Thursday. If they can at least win a couple, that'll definitely help their standings and potentially making an NCAA regional. As of right now, according to multiple, most of the big sites that do projections have Alabama as one of the first 4 or first 5 teams out. And so if they can make a deep run in this tournament, they still have a shot of making a regional. That being said, if they lose tomorrow, it's looking it would look less and less likely that they'll make a regional this year.
Yeah, and just 3-4 weeks ago that seemed implausible. They were middle of the pack in the SEC West, which is a hell of an accomplishment, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know. But nonetheless, they lose 8 of their last 9, correct? And they're just on a downward trend. And now they head into this SEC tournament, and regardless of the sport, and regardless of if you're a high seed or a low seed, it's always anything can happen. But you do start off with South Carolina. But all these things that have kind of compounded upon themselves. What's needed to right the ship here in the next few days before they take on South Carolina?
Well, the good thing for Alabama is that they haven't played South Carolina yet this year. And I talking about them, I think they lost 7 of their last 8 games. It doesn't help that they had to travel and play number 2 Vanderbilt. They didn't have to play at LSU, which LSU is not the LSU baseball that we know very well, but or are familiar with, but it's still LSU baseball. And then, of course, they hosted number 6 Mississippi State, which they could be ranked higher if there weren't so many other SEC teams up in the rankings. But that didn't help them. But talking about what they need to do moving forward this week, first things first, their relievers need to be solid tomorrow. Tyler Ross needs to hopefully go a little bit deeper than he normally does. He typically goes about 3 innings. If they could stretch him out to 5 and he's still pitching well, that'll really help them if they can pull off the win to go deeper in the tournament. If he's only able to do 2 or 3, then that creates, of course, a bullpen situation, having, potentially 5 consecutive days of games and you have a shallow bullpen. That doesn't really help you out. So hopefully Ross will be able to start a little bit deeper tomorrow. Hopefully they'll get a lot of practice. They practiced today at the Hoover Met. Hopefully they can get their infield because together because this past weekend against Mississippi State, they had to start Denton at first, like I said earlier. And unfortunately, that resulted in a couple of balls getting past him, a couple of guys reaching base that shouldn't. And that's not on him. The guy's not used to playing on the right side of the field. His bat is still as good as ever. Denton's come in clutch a lot this season for them, so it's good to still have him in the batter's box. But they're really going to need to tighten down the defensive infield, work on their pitching, and they really need the bats to come alive. They've, prior to these past few weeks, their bats are doing pretty good. Like you said, they were in the middle of the pack in the SEC West, which is a pretty stellar accomplishment. But their bats have kind of quieted down a little bit. So if they can get that going, and then, of course, I would assume that Dylan Smith would start on Wednesday. That's saying if they win tomorrow. If they can get some run production behind Dylan Smith, which they haven't been able to do so far this year, I think that could be the recipe for them to at least make it to Thursday with 2 wins. It'll be hard, but it's definitely possible for this team.
And because I think you'll answer this the way I think you will. You're an average team in the SEC West. Do you want to play a football schedule or a baseball schedule?
I think to be completely honest, I think. Sorry, my audio is getting to me.
Oh, no, I feel you.
I think. Sorry about that coughing. No, I think I'd rather play football. To be completely honest with you, the SEC West is stacked, and the East is not too shabby as well. People talk about how competitive the SEC is in football, but really, when you look at baseball, it is one of the toughest divisions in all of college sports. It's really tough, and you have the number 1 team in the country in Arkansas, and you have number 2 Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. Ole Miss is always a solid team. It's just a lot of competition for Alabama in the West.
Yeah, I mean, just on a random day, Gump fan that only follows football, there's nothing wrong with that. But take a look at the SEC or take a look at the NCAA Top 25 in football, and then take a look at it in baseball. In football, you probably see 7, 8 football teams from the SEC. And in baseball, it's like 10 or 11, sometimes 12. It's pretty ridiculous over there. But moving to the other diamond, softball will host Kentucky this week in the Super Regionals. Already dealt with them in the SEC tournament in the first round. Took it to them pretty good before struggling a little bit with Tennessee and then crushing Florida emphatically, if I could say so. I know you don't run rule them or anything, but to handle them the way they did, the softball team is pretty legit, and they look to have another opportunity to head to the World Series after the Kentucky series this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a good it's going to be a good matchup. Alabama, of course, handled Kentucky relatively easily in the SEC tournament, but let's not forget that Kentucky was one of only 2 teams this year that was able to best Alabama in a 3-game series. The other team, of course, being Florida, who won the regular season conference title. The thing we have to remember about Alabama against Florida in that 3rd game, was Phelps' 3rd day in a row on the mound, and she was still able to shut them out 4-0, which was quite impressive. But this Alabama-Kentucky matchup, I really like it in Alabama's favor. Of course, they're coming home to play at Rhodes once again. 2 weekends in a row, actually 3 weekends in a row if you could count the SEC tournament.
Right.
So a really good matchup for them. Kentucky has been able to slip by them a couple of times this season. But it's still a good, favorable matchup for Alabama, and the fact that they have to play either Arizona or Arkansas is also really favorable if they make it to the Women's College World Series next week. I really, I think, what's going to be behind this game, as it always is for Alabama, is the pitching. We had Kilfoyle this past weekend pitch that combined no-hitter with Crystal Goodman in a 6th inning, mercy rule game. And then on top of that, of course, Phelps was just dominant as always. And Alabama's bats haven't been as hot as they were, earlier in the season, or in the middle of the season, but it hasn't mattered because their pitching has been so dominant in the circle. And I think their pitching has gotten this far, and that's not a discredit to their bats at all. Their bats are still solid, and of course, you still have Bailey Hemphill to contend with for the other team, which is terrifying. But if you're an opponent, but I think their pitching is going to get them through. I think Kentucky's lineup doesn't really stand a chance, but that's just my opinion.
Well, that's kind of interesting because that was kind of where my next question was going to go, because when I watch this team, their ability to get on base is very impressive. Despite Bailey Hemphill having 3 times as many walks as she does home runs, because she's such a threat, she's really the only home run threat. I mean, you do see a few others sprinkled in here and there, but Alabama's a small ball, get on base kind of team, and they execute that game plan brilliantly. And Montana Fouts, no doubt, probably the best pitcher in all of college softball. But behind her, Kilfoyle did look good against Alabama State. And, you know, we haven't seen a lot out of Crystal Goodman. Haven't seen Cornball outside of being a pinch runner in a long time. So which would concern you more, not only in the Kentucky series, but even looking forward? And I know I shouldn't look ahead, but I feel pretty confident about this team. But even looking ahead, is it the lack of heavy bats, even in the face of the good small ball game plan, or is it the questions in the pitching depth?
No, I think the pitching depth will get them, you know, as far as they need to. I'm not really concerned with that at all. I mean, you do have Kilfoyle and Goodman, which, you know, are, of course, on a lower level than Faust, but Faust has proven time and time again that she can go long, complete games and then come out the very next day and do it again, rinse and repeat. I'm not worried about their pitching depth at all, you know, barring an injury, which, of course, none of us want. You hate to see that. I think Alabama's going to be fine in the rotation. As far as their bats are concerned, you're right. They don't have really very many heavy bats. I mean, Hemphill leads the team, of course, with 12 home runs this year, and second is Kaylee Tao with 7. And then you have to go even further down to 3 home runs for Savannah Woodard. But that doesn't really concern me. Over the past couple of weeks, we haven't seen of course, they had the 9-0 win, which was the mercy rule, but we haven't seen as much mercy rules as of late, which, you know, a win's a win. But when there's not a mercy rule with Alabama softball, typically that means there's not a lot of as much run production as normal. So that's a little bit of a concern, especially because, you know, every round the opponents are going to get more and more difficult. But that being said, you know, you still have, you know, Kaylee Tao, who has 13 doubles this year. You have KB Sides, who has 10 doubles. You know, you have Alexis Mack, who's just been very consistent. She leads team batting average with 428, I believe is what it is. You know, you still have those consistent players that are able to get on base. If I had to pick between the two, I would say that I'll be a little bit more concerned with Alabama bats than, you know, pitching in the circle. But that being said, this is still a really solid Alabama team. And as odd as this is for me to say, I think when you're looking at it from a national scale, I think number 3 is honestly a little low for Alabama. I think they could be ranked a little bit higher.
Oh, no doubt, especially when you consider Oklahoma did not have to go through the rigors of an SEC schedule or an SEC tournament with one pitcher. Just saying.
That's true.
Hey, I bet you didn't know it was possible, but we went 17 minutes without me asking you an Alabama football question.
Oh, goodness gracious. We need to write that down. I think that's a record.
I mean, technically, I did ask you about Julio Jones at Alabama, but that was the news of the day. It doesn't count.
You caught me off guard. You had to be reminiscent at the beginning of the segment, and now I'm caught off guard.
Right. We're talking to Joey Blackwell, Bama Central beat writer. He covers it all for the guys at Sports Illustrated. Joey, we do need to talk about Alabama football, though, because that's what pays the bills around here. I can't stop. You know I'm a defensive guy, but I can't stop looking at this defense, and we haven't been able to talk since Henry Toto was announced his transfer to the University of Alabama. So I just from that standpoint, bringing him in, all this depth in the front 7. When we get done talking to you, I'm going to talk about the depth on the defensive line. That's probably 10 deep. And then at inside linebacker with Toto, you're at least 4 deep there too. And on the edges, you still feel comfortable too. So just that front 7, you add in Henry Toto, that's pretty damn dangerous, don't you think?
Oh yeah, landing Tuo is fantastic get for Alabama, and it just I feel like I say this every time I'm on this show, and it's just another example of the rich getting richer with the new transfer rule. He was a former top 50 recruit in 2019. He's going to he made an instant impact as a freshman. At Tennessee, he had 72 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. He had all SEC freshman team honors, course, in his first year, and just adding that, he's a high upside guy, and his commitment, he upgrades the position, and he's going to fit really well with Alabama and the other, the rest of the linebackers that they have there. But moving on to the defensive line, I've been really comparing the potential for this defensive line to really rival the 2015 defensive line, which in my opinion is probably the best that Alabama's had. That unit consisted of Ashawn Robinson, Jaron Reed. Of course, you had Jonathan Allen. He was technically really a backup in that group. If any time Jonathan Allen's a backup, that says something. You had Dalvin Tomlinson that year, but to this year, you have a really good defensive line core. You have, of course, LeBrian Ray and Phil Mathis, DJ Dale, Justin Boygby. Let's not forget Byron Young or Tim Smith. The three juniors and Dale Boy being young, they've played a bunch of football since their freshman year, so they've gotten that experience despite them only being juniors. And it's just this defense is just going to be very impressive this year. I think that and Alabama's defense has been good in recent years as well. I know there's a lot of talk about them being disappointing, but I think a lot of that can be attributed to just the changing face of college football. Gone are the days where you don't allow, where you only allow 3 points or 7 points. Gone are the days where you hold opposing offenses to 120 total yards. Those games are really going to be few and far between, and I think it's going to be the same this year. But just as far as dominating the opposing offensive line, I think Alabama's defensive line this year is going to be something to stare at. They're going to be really good.
They are, and I think health is probably going to be one of the biggest key factors, especially you look at LeBron Ray. Poor guy hasn't been able to finish the season, but I mean, he's got the goods if he can stay out there. And I mean, the fact that you have to name off 4 or 5 people before you say Tim Smith, dude reminds me so much of Christian Barmore. Once he learns, he's going to be unstoppable. And you pair him with guys like Fedarian Mathis and Byron Young that have all this experience, DJ Dale. I mean, I don't know how other offensive lines, because this is an age of turnover in the SEC. There are not a lot of players coming back with a ton of experience, and yet Alabama returns all this experience on defense, not just in the front, but also in the back end. When you're talking about Moore is one of the most fantastic freshmen in the SEC. Byron Branch opposite him, all the same. Josh Jobe ready to pick up. Jalen Armour-Davis, I think he's got the goods to be that opposite corner. And Jordan Battle, Daniel Wright, and DeMarco Helms. I mean, when you can name 25 guys that can contribute to a defense in a given year, it's not fair.
No, and I think, kind of comparing it back to the line of old, I think that Smith could really, kind of be compared to Marcel Darius's role in 2009. That season, Darius, came in primarily during the dime rabbit, in passing situations, which resulted in 9 tackles for a loss and 6.5 sacks. And I honestly think that Smith could be more athletic. If healthy, Ryan Ray, talking about his injuries, if he's healthy this year, he'll probably be the other third down lineman with, Young, Aboybe, and Mathis and Dale subbing in and out, during first and second down situations. Just there's so many options. The base 3-4 probably have Ray, Mathis, and Dale on the first team. Possibly, with Aboybe, Smith, and Young as the change-ups, but don't be fooled by, what the fall depth chart reads. All these guys are going to be coming out into the field, and it just goes to show just the impressive amount of depth that they have on the line this year. It's I hate to kind of overhype it, but it's going to be a ridiculous defensive line this year.
Hey, you know me. Out of the two of us, I'm the takes guy, and I as soon as Toto was announced, I just went out and said it. And this is the best defense in college football, and everybody else can come fight me about it. I don't know how you could look anywhere else. Everywhere else, they've lost all the key pieces. Alabama returned all of the key pieces, save Patrick Surtain and Dylan Moses and Christian Barmore. I mean, those are 3 incredible players. Don't get me wrong, but when you return eight starters and the depth behind them is just as ridiculous as the starters are, that just speaks volume. Looking outward across the state, most specifically, I don't know if you saw that Bo Nix is apparently a first-round quarterback now, but he's got competition now. TJ Finley joins the Tigers in the quarterback room with everything that Brian Harsin has to contend with. The expectations are going to be sky high on him. He's got to come in and, your job in Auburn is simply to make life a living hell for Alabama. It would appear to be very difficult to do that with a guy like TJ Finley, potentially a quarterback in the future, considering he's already failed to even impose a threat to Alabama once already in his career, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he completed roughly 50% of his passes against Alabama last year, and it resulted in him being benched the final 2 games of the season, in favor of Max Johnson down there in Baton Rouge. And he did start 5 games, of course, as a freshman after Miles Brennan went down with the ab injury. But I think it does. It brings some sense of talent at quarterback to Auburn. I think that he could compete with Bo Nix. I think, and this is once again maybe my bias showing a little bit here, but I think Bo Nix has been overhyped again and again. And, I think that Finley could be the answer. Now, it's a little late. I don't foresee, Finley coming in now and all of a sudden starting this year. I don't see that at all. I think it's a little too late for him to start on the gridiron this year for the Tigers. But I still think that he could come in, make an impact. We might see him, if Auburn's pulling ahead, we could see him, coming in late, late in the games in garbage time, getting a little bit ready. And, of course, if Nix were to, struggle a little bit, we might see him put in there. I still think Nix is a day one starter, but he definitely has a lot more competition on that roster than he did 24 hours ago.
Yeah, and you might get to see him plenty of times. I think Auburn just scheduled another Group of 5 team on their schedule this year.
Hey, now.
I know Alabama's guilty too, but that schedule is something else. They start with Akron. Are you serious?
Well, I mean, when Alabama plays other SEC teams and makes them look like cupcakes, you might as well throw some icing on there as well with these Group of 5 teams.
Oh, no doubt. Hey, man, that's all I got for you tonight. Tell them where they can check you out at Bama Central.
All right. Well, of course, like Jacob just said, everybody can check me out at BamaCentral.com. You can also check out all my stories on Twitter at Blackwell of Sports. Tomorrow morning, I'll have a little bit more in-depth SEC tournament preview with Alabama, of course, at the center of that. And should be a good week here in Birmingham. Hopefully, Bama makes it more than one day so that I can stick out here a little bit longer. It's going to be a good tournament regardless. Last year, of course, we didn't have it, and it's just good to get back to that sense of normalcy with first the SEC basketball tournament, the SEC softball tournament, and now here in Birmingham for the baseball.
Absolutely, Joey Blackwell at Blackwell Sports. Enjoy your time back home in Birmingham, dude. Take it easy.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime. Joey Blackwell, go check him out at Blackwell Sports and be sure to give his stuff a read. Does incredible features. He's a Big J journalist to my Hot Take radio guy, one of the best writers in this entire city. I do not say that as his friend. I say that as a fellow sports writer, talking head kind of guy. So be sure to go check out Joey Blackwell's content.